So one thing is very interesting in your latest book, again, on the implications of technology, you speculate about the likely birth of new religions inspired by technology. Say a little more about that.
Yes, I think that there is a good chance that Silicon Valley and places like it will create not just gadgets and tools, but ideological systems and even religions that will make many of the traditional promises of religion, promising, justice and prosperity and even immortality, but here on Earth with the help of technology, and not after you die with the help of supernatural beings. And you can say that we've actually seen at least some techno-religions, religions based on technology, previously. Maybe the best example is socialism and communism. Communism promised to create paradise on Earth with the help of the technology of the Industrial Revolution. And now it didn't work very well, but this was the basic idea. We don't need God, we just need to control the means of production, and the engineers and the technicians, they can create paradise on Earth for us. And this didn't work very well, but I think that in the 21st century, we'll see a second wave of these techno-religions. Now, if you don't like the term religion, you can just use ideology instead, but I think there is no essential difference between ideology and religion. They both fulfill the same function in history, to give legitimacy to human institutions and to human norms and values. Whether there is a God involved or not is really far less important than the historical function, because in the end, it's not God that makes religions, it's humans that make religion.
The dividing line for me, usually between religion and another kind of ideology, like a political one, is at the line between the natural and the supernatural. So when you're positing the existence of invisible agents for which you have no real evidence, or you're making claims about the validity of prophecy, the Messiah is going to return, or you're making claims about the survival of consciousness after death based on precious little evidence, that's where I think it's obviously a religious enterprise, and you have superstition and otherworldliness creeping in. But again, there's no very clear line there. And when you talk about something like what the personality cult in North Korea at the moment, obviously it has many of the features of a religion, certainly the socially consequential ones. And then you have something like the singularity phenomenon, or the idea of the singularity in Silicon Valley as propounded by somebody like Ray Kurzweil. That has many of the features of, otherworldliness, arguably, that a classical religion does. I mean, there's this expectation of immortality that you mentioned a few moments ago. And yeah, I agree that the boundaries here are somewhat fungible. But when you think of the birth of a technology-inspired religion, is the notion of the singularity something that answers to that description already, or are you thinking about something else?
Definitely. That's probably the best example we have today. I think like the singularitarians may deserve the title, of the first Silicon Valley techno-religion. But as the technology matures and delivers more and more achievements and power, I think we'll see more and more of that. Especially because, again, in contrast to ancient religions like Christianity or the religion of ancient Egypt, when you needed to postpone most of your desires to the afterlife, the immense attraction of the new technologies is that they promise to fulfill all these miracles here and now, in this very life on Earth. Now, whether they manage to do it or not, it's a different question, of course, but the temptation is, I think, immense.
The difference here, it really does strike me as a difference, is that the technology that promises this kind of rapturous fulfillment of all human desire exists to a considerable degree even now, and we are noticing it while it creates these benefits, the benefits of intelligent technology and automation. It is creating the very harms that will make people more and more desperate to find something to anchor them. Take automation as the narrow case. The consequences of automation, I think, unarguably at this point, will be a kind of relentless loss of the need for human labor, right? There are jobs that will go away that will never be replaced. And in the limit, when you get perfect automation and perfect AI, we have a total change of just the purpose of human life. And people will not be able to find their meaning anymore in work because there is no need for human work. In the same way that there's virtually no need for horses to work now, And if you gave me a horse, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I mean, if you gave me a free horse, you would just be imposing a cost on me, right? Whereas a century ago, there were, I think, 28 million horses working in the US, and they were indispensable. So if you buy the fact that we are moving towards something like, in the best case, I mean, this is to be desired, and this is a matter of success. You know, if we don't destroy ourselves with technology, we will be putting ourselves out of a job. Then the challenges of wealth inequality and you know, how to spread this wealth around and developing the political and ethical norms that will get people to want to do that, that's a huge challenge. And you'll have vast numbers of people who are looking for meaning in their lives. And, you know, obviously that's a problem now. It's been a problem for thousands of years, but it's a problem that most people haven't had to confront very directly because the burden has been on them to spend most of their lives working. And that's something that seems to be going away. Again, if we succeed, if it doesn't go away, it means we have created some chaos for ourselves that will be intolerable for other reasons. So tell me about your views on wealth inequality here and the implications of automation and artificial intelligence for the future.
I'll speak first about inequality and then about the problem of meaning, which I think is the deepest problem. With inequality, the danger, as you say, is that automation and the rise of AI will create the most unequal society that ever existed. Because more and more people will be pushed out of the job market to join a new class, the useless class. People who are not just unemployed, but unemployable. There is nothing to do with them. And we already see it in the military, that already in the 20th century, the best armies recruited millions of everybody, basically, they could get. Today, most humans are militarily useless. There is nothing to do with them in the army. The army rely on small numbers of highly professional soldiers, these super warriors like the special elite, special forces, and increasingly on sophisticated technology, like drones and cyber warfare and things like that. And if the same thing happens in the economy, then we will have a massive new useless class. Now, people often say that new jobs will emerge to replace the old jobs, just as happened in previous waves of automation. But I think we cannot be so sure that the same thing will happen again for several reasons. First of all, humans have basically two kinds of abilities we know about, physical and cognitive. And traditionally or previously in the 20th century, machines competed with us in physical abilities. So humans moved to working more and more in jobs that require cognitive abilities. But once machines compete with us also in cognitive abilities, we don't know of a third field that everybody can move to working in that. The other problem is that previously when you had automation, so people moved from working in low-skilled jobs to working in new low-skilled jobs. Like if you lost your job as a farm worker in 1900, then you moved to Detroit and start working as a factory hand and producing tractors or automobiles. And this was relatively easy because the new jobs was low skill. Then when you lost your job in the factory because of automation or because production moved to China or whatever, then you find a new job working as a cashier at Walmart, which is again a low skill job. So it was relatively easy. But if you look to the future, what we see is that low-skilled jobs, say at Walmart, will disappear. And people say, yes, but we'll have new jobs because we'll need a lot of software engineers to create virtual realities or AI or whatever. But I don't see any way in which an unemployed cashier from Walmart is suddenly becoming a software engineer in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
It demands a shift from low skill to high skill, and this is just not feasible in most cases. So the potential is really for creating immense gaps between a tiny elite, which will benefit from the automation, and most people who might lose their economic and also their political power. And there are all kinds of ideas what to do about it, like universal basic income. But I don't think that any of the models so far created really provide an answer. I think that universal basic income is maybe a step in the right direction, but it's a half-baked idea because it doesn't really explain what universal is and what basic is.
And it opens us directly to the problem that was bundled in that question of meaning. So you have most people deriving whatever meaning they get in life, at least in significant part, from doing work they sort of enjoy.
Yeah.
So you have to, I mean, apart from the incentive problems, we want to incentivize people insofar as incentives still matter appropriately. But in the most utopian case, if we develop the perfect labor-saving technology and just cancel any need for human drudgery going forward, and then we develop the ethical and political and economic wherewithal to share the wealth to the perfect degree, whatever that is, answering your questions about what is universal and what is basic, and then people are free to live as creatively and beautifully and organize themselves in any way that they want, you're then left with the problem of what does the average Homo sapien mind do with so much leisure? And how do you find meaning in that context? Do you see that as an easy problem to solve, or is it something that is going to give rise to new pathologies and conflicts of a sort that we can scarcely imagine?
I think it's going to be a very difficult problem and a very interesting problem. I don't think it's impossible to solve it, but it's a very serious challenge. Everything we've so far seen in history indicates that most people will not know what to do with this kind of freedom and leisure. One option that some experts point is that people will just spend more and more time in virtual reality games, three-dimensional virtual worlds, which will provide them with far more excitement and meaning than anything in the real world. Which is one possibility. In a way, again, it's not completely new, because you can say that for thousands of years, most people found meaning in playing virtual reality games, which we just called religions. Religion is a huge virtual reality game. You invent certain rules that exist only in your imagination, like you must pray 5 times a day, you shouldn't eat pork, 2 men shouldn't have sex with one another, and so forth. These laws exist only in your imagination. And you go through life and you try to gain points. I mean, you pray for 5 times a day, you gain points. You have sex with another man, you lose points. If by the time you die, you have enough points, then you get to the next level, supposedly. And millions of people for thousands of years have found meaning in playing this huge virtual reality game. So this could continue in a different way also in the future. I think the really deep problem with the question of meaning has to do with the structure of the human mind, that Homo sapiens is a storytelling animal. We think in stories, we expect reality to be a story, and we expect the meaning of life also to be a story. When people ask what is the meaning of life, they almost always expect the answer to come in the shape of a story. Some huge cosmic drama with a beginning and middle and end and heroes and villains and so forth, and very important, with a role for me to play in the drama, in the big story. And I think the problem is that reality doesn't come in the shape of a story. I think as a kind of a rule of thumb, if the meaning of life that you think you have found is in the shape of a story, it's wrong. It's a human invention. And how to overcome that, I don't think we are anywhere near knowing the answer to that one.
It's interesting there because I noticed at one point in your book, you said something a little skeptical about my conception of the moral landscape, the idea that there can be right answers to questions of good and evil or right and wrong or human values. But I see it as very much of a piece with what you just expressed there, the idea that the meaning of life is not a matter of having the right story about it. And even if you get rid of all stories or admit that all stories don't have really deep roots in reality, there still is just the fact that we live in a universe where certain experiences are possible, and we are navigating in this space, and we're navigating without a map or with a very primitive map. And whatever our stories and their utility, there still is a difference between excruciating and pointless misery and far more sublime and desirable states of consciousness. Again, whatever stories we tell ourselves or whether we tell ourselves any, we must navigate. We have no choice but to navigate. We keep moving toward things that are painful. And sometimes these pains lead to better things on the other side, and we're surprised that the pain had a purpose. And sometimes it's just getting worse and worse, and we know we want to move in another direction, whether individually or collectively. And so we have this navigation problem. And the possibilities there that await us are absolutely the result of however reality is. And if we can integrate our minds with technology that allows us to as you say, fudge this boundary between fiction and fact, and we can live in a kind of Aldous Huxley dystopia or utopia, depending on how you look at it, where everyone is lost in his own dream world of virtual reality or some other thing that is just the product of the human imagination. Well, then we may not be at base level reality anymore, but we're still partaking of states of consciousness that are possible. And our exploration in those domains is, again, constrained by what is possible. And so I see us as navigating in this space, and things can go wonderfully right or disastrously wrong based on how it is certain experiences become possible. Do you agree with that, or is there some way in which you're not converging with me there?
No, I think I agree. I mean, certainly suffering is real. I mean, sometimes misery and suffering and pain are caused by some story in which people believed, but it doesn't matter. The suffering itself is real. I would say that if you really want to explore reality, the best place to start is with suffering, because it's the most real thing in the world. With happiness, it's very difficult to tell whether, many times people tell themselves, oh, I'm very happy, and actually they are not. They are deluding themselves. And that's difficult, but with suffering, it's usually much easier to know. So yes, this is definitely real.
Although even there, suffering is amenable to being reconstrued based on the conceptual frame you put around it. So if you've ever engaged in a very intense athletic event, say, or people who have trained to be the kinds of elite soldiers you just referenced, Navy SEALs, they go through something like a physical hell. If you imposed that training on some unsuspecting person against his will, you would be guilty of torturing them, right? And yet people willingly do this because they have a goal that they're in touch with, and they want to get to the other side of this physical ordeal. It's not viewed as torture. And in fact, when they look back on it, it's some of the most positive experience they've had, even though if you could sample their moment-to-moment experience while enduring it, they were in agony. As you must know from meditation, there are experiences of extraordinarily intense sensation when you're sitting for hours with, a pain in your knee, for instance, where it becomes genuinely difficult to tell whether what you're experiencing is agony or ecstasy. It's sheer intensity. If you have a true equanimity of attention at that moment, the difference almost doesn't matter. So there is something paradoxical even about suffering when you really pay attention to it.
Yes, definitely. Suffering, it's also a very complex matter. I would say that suffering certainly isn't pain. Suffering is generated by the mind. It's the reaction of the mind that is suffering.
Right.
It's not the objective condition in the outside world. It's not even the sensations in the body. In the body, you can have pain, you can have pressure, you can have heat. This is not suffering. The suffering is the reaction of the mind. The mind, for some reason, it doesn't matter what the reason is, for some reason, the mind doesn't like something and reacts by generating suffering, by trying to push it away, by hating this thing.
Yeah. And
this is the suffering, the reaction of the mind. It's not easy to see it, of course. But and therefore also just as happiness is not obvious what it is, so also is suffering. It's not obvious what it is. But in the end, this is the most real thing in the world.
Well, that's a fascinating claim, because given that it's vulnerable to inspection in the way that we've described, given that there's an illusory component to suffering. In fact, once you realize that it is at the level of a story as opposed to at the level of the raw, painful sensation, it is somewhat paradoxical to say that it's the most real thing in the world. It's certainly real in terms of its motivational consequences. People are, again, going to war or just initiating the great sweeps of history based on what they want out of life and being driven by the goad of suffering in one direction or another. But the person who is just told that, the pile of paper in his bag worth $1 million just went up in flames and he begins to suffer over it, it's odd to describe that principle as the most real thing in the world.
For that person, at that moment, the intense misery he experiences, this is the most real thing in the world. Now, the cause of the misery may be an illusion or several illusions stuck one on top of the other. But actual experience for that person, at that moment, this is the reality for him.
Yeah.
And, in Western philosophy, you see it very, very clearly, I think, with Descartes, that he goes on this expedition of doubting the whole world. And how do I know? I like the Matrix. how do I know that the trees and then the sky and the other people, how do I know that anything really exists? And how can I trust anything? And in the end, he comes to the point when the only thing he can trust is his own momentary mental state. His very doubt, the thought, is the only thing he can trust. And then, of course, he makes a terrible mistake. He says, I think, therefore I am. And he invents the I out of nowhere. He should have said, there is thought, therefore there is thought. But no, because I think of the Christian tradition, he couldn't get rid of it. And he invented a self, an I, that thinks the thought. And once he began inventing, very quickly, he also somehow managed to invent God and bring him into the picture and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
But if you go with the radical doubt of Descartes, then you see that the only thing you cannot doubt is your own momentary mental state right now. In this sense, this is the most real thing in the world.
The phrase I've used on this podcast and elsewhere is that consciousness is the one thing in this universe that cannot be an illusion. Because even if you're radically confused about everything, even if you're not at the base layer of reality and you're in the hard drive of some alien supercomputer and confused about everything, this is the modern equivalent of being a brain in a vat, you still can't deny that something seems to be happening. And that seeming is as much a demonstration of consciousness as anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's say a little more about the implications of our being able to engineer new conscious experiences, exploring experiences that no human being has ever had before. One interesting implication for me here is that the moment you begin talking about changing the human mind, now whether this is changing the brain directly or changing it by virtue of its integration with technology or new, far more targeted drugs than anything that exists, you're talking about an ability to change human intuitions about value. You could change our sense of good and evil. You could change our desire for certain experiences. If you don't like escargot, I could give you the right neural implant that would cause you to like it. And then you have to ask yourself, do you want to be the kind of person who likes escargot, right? And so you get this loss of foundation where, all of our values are now no longer anchored to anything that, evolution has prepared for us. I mean, we're no longer just apes who are disgusted by predictable things. We can change our likes and our disgusts. And the question is, what should we do given that power? Many people worry that this would mean that therefore all truth and all value would be purely relative there. But from my point of view, that's not the case. You can still ask the further question whether changing our sense of right and wrong or good and evil on a certain point is itself good, which is to say, is it moving toward better, more sublime, more durable, more creative, more beautiful conscious states, or is it moving elsewhere?
I think that the first and basic realization that is part of what you're saying is that there is an entire ocean of consciousness, of potential conscious mental states out there that we know nothing about, which was a very common understanding in many, if not most, cultures in history, but which disappeared from modern Western culture. In modern Western culture, the assumption is that the mental experiences of the average person is basically all there is and all there ever will be, or it's the apex of reality, of the potential. And to the degree that even the most obvious extensions, animal consciousness has been denied. No, animals don't have consciousness, they don't have minds. You only have basically one tiny island of consciousness, which is the mental states of modern people. And this is probably nonsense. I mean, the universe, just as it would be ridiculous to say that the only possible configuration of matter is the human body, it is ridiculous to say that the only possible configuration of mind is the mind of middle-class Americans in the early 21st century. But this is basically what we have been saying for quite a long time. And there is an entire ocean of consciousness, of mental states out there that we know nothing about. Some of them have existed before in other animals, but many of them never existing in any animal, but they are still part of the possible spectrum of mental states.
Right.
And it is likely that in the coming decades or centuries, we will start exploring this ocean of consciousness like the European discoverers in the 14th and 15th centuries that are starting to explore the oceans of planet Earth.
just to clarify there, you're not claiming that these conscious states or that this mind exists already and that we will somehow unite with it. You're claiming that there is a larger set of possible conscious experience that we can navigate in, given the requisite changes to our minds.
Exactly. If you think about, the evolution from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, then we assume Homo sapiens has all kinds of mental experiences which no Homo erectus ever had. And maybe it's because we have a different brain structure. Maybe it's because of the interaction between brain structure and culture. For whatever reason, still we assume that once in the age of Homo erectus, many of the mental experiences we have today didn't exist. But they are part of the potential spectrum of mind. And eventually they were realized through the evolution of Homo sapiens. And in a similar way, looking to the future, there might be all kinds of other mental states out there, never realized before by any organism, but that could be realized either by some other kind of organism, like a superhuman or whatever, or maybe by a cyborg or by a non-organic being. Which is also a possibility. Now, of course, you have the question of value, whether one mental state is better than another mental state. And I think that the obvious answer is yes. We all the time make evaluations of comparing different mental states. I mean, what we do throughout our lives is to pursue some mental states and run away from others. Again, we think we are pursuing objectives in the outside world, like we want a lot of money, we want a good job, we want to find love. But all these things, at bottom, they are particular mental states that we prefer to other mental states.
Yeah. How much do you think we should value reality over fiction? Again, realizing that this boundary is porous, but its porousness is going to force this issue upon us in ways that you've intimated. So, for instance, if we can spend more and more time in virtual worlds, which become less and less distinguishable from the real world. Our video games get so good that even someone now who's not even tempted to play video games will one day find them to be the most enthralling and ultimately only art form worth paying attention to. And let's say you begin to feel in relationship to these products of human imagination. But of course, you're not really in relationship unless the characters in the games become conscious themselves. It seems to me that there's two very different possibilities here. You can be, and one of them is very reminiscent of something like an Aldous Huxley dystopia. The world becomes shattered by people's uses of attention in these private spheres of creative imagination. So all of us spend hours a day lost in these dream worlds, essentially video games. To some degree, we already do that, obviously. We read novels, we listen to the voice in our heads, every minute of the day. The world is already shattered into these private uses of attention where we're really not connecting with other real conscious beings or the world itself, while we're lost in these dreamscapes. But it seems to me that this technology could take this in a direction that is very Matrix-like, and maybe this just brands me as a very provincial person, but it seems on its face terrifying and worth avoiding to have us all point our minds into a kind of imaginative solitude more and more, no matter how captivating that can be made to seem. Do you have that same bias that somehow we want an integrated reality where we're really in relationship rather than a dreamscape, however pleasant?
Well, you could have a dreamscape in which many people interact. So you still suspend the laws of physics and so forth, but you have other consciousnesses, other minds out there to interact with them. And I guess that, at least for the foreseeable future, to be really fun and really exciting, you would need the other minds in the game with you. Which is the entire secret of success of social networks and of games like Minecraft and Pokemon and things like that. But, as I said before, the idea of turning attention to a dream world and getting your meaning of life from there is nothing really new about it. The form is new, but the idea is old. Again, religion is the best example of how humans have been doing it for thousands of years. I would say that for me, the really big danger in enclosing yourself within this kind of virtual realities that makes your dreams come true. The problem is that at the very deep level, the reaction of the human mind to pleasure isn't satisfaction, it's craving for more. And so even if you create extremely pleasant worlds, people will just want more and more. And I don't think they will be satisfied. And it will become, it's like addiction.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is, addiction to drugs. So at present, the state doesn't like addiction to drugs because it harms your productivity and your ability to perform as a good citizen. But if the state doesn't need you and you can be all day in some trip, then that objection is pushed to the side. But the deeper objection is that in the long run, I just don't see how it makes people satisfied. It just makes them more and more addicted with time because you need, larger and larger doses of this pleasant mental experience. And for me, the real key to happiness is to know the truth about yourself and about the world. I think if you really know the truth, not as a story and not as a theory, but through direct realization, you've realized what is the truth of existence, then you're really, that's really the firm basis for happiness. And you are unlikely to get that by pursuing ever more pleasant experiences in some dream world.
Yeah, or a real one for that matter.
Or a real one, yeah. I mean, it's worse with the dream world because theoretically they could, or you could increase the dosage all the time. In the real world, you eventually bump against some obstacle which stops this mad pursuit and gives you the opportunity to change direction. But in a dream world, you're in danger of being completely imprisoned by this constant pursuit of pleasure and excitement without having any opportunity to really explore reality.
When you say that you can be lost in a dream world and because of the endless opportunity to increase the dosage, essentially, of creativity or beauty or desire fulfillment, you may never be able to discover what is really true about the mind, which is the key to ending your search for satisfaction. How would you describe that truth? What is the truth that people would be in danger of never discovering in those conditions?
It's the truth of the nature of the mind itself, and especially the truth that all these experiences and feelings and sensations, they are really just ephemeral vibrations. They have no deep meaning, and this is why they can't give you any lasting satisfaction. If you get for a moment some pleasant feeling, it immediately disappears, and you need to grasp the next. It never lasts. And this is the essential nature of all these experiences and feelings and sensations. And I think only once you begin to realize that, you have a real chance of understanding yourself and of being really satisfied. Because otherwise, you just think that, oh, I'm missing this particular feeling, I'm missing this particular experience, this is why I'm not satisfied. If I only had it, then finally I'll be satisfied. And there is no such thing.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson to learn, isn't it?
It's a very hard lesson to learn. It's very hard in the outside real world, and it will be even harder in a dream world. And also, part of the issue is if you really want to explore reality and you try to explore only the pleasant aspects, you're not really exploring reality. You're just running away from something.